Hey friends, thanks for joining me, Jim Baroud, to hear a few insights from leaders who represent our innovation ecosystem. Today's chat is with Martin Babinec, the founder and former CEO of TriNet. He's also the founder of several foundations that help the entrepreneurship ecosystem. Tell us about your entrepreneurial journey.
Well, it all began in the city of Little Falls, New York, which you see in my background. Although right now it looks a little different since it's about 10 degrees there and a lot of snow. But the fact is I was blessed to be born with an entrepreneurial dad and who was a factory worker, but did some things on the side. And after college, what got me really moving, I was an HR manager, and it's necessary to understand the background before I started TriNet to appreciate this. I worked for Navy Exchanges, which operates the post exchanges for the Department of the Navy. And that was my work right out of college, working on the East Coast, West Coast, Japan, Southern Italy, no two more opposite places in the world, I point out, than Japan and Southern Italy. It was wonderful. And then my last assignment with Navy Exchanges was in the San Francisco Bay Area, where I headed up HR for all of Northern California, a few thousand employees in our operations there. And as soon as I got to the ground in the San Francisco Bay Area, I immediately went out trying to find a job, and nobody would hire me because by that point I had worked for Navy Exchanges for more than 10 years. And I had stamped on my forehead in the eyes of corporate recruiters and others, I was already good for government use only. And nobody valued what I could do. And I would not trade that background that I went through for anything. It was the most wonderful experience ever. But like most people who start companies, I had ambition just to get out of the large organization setting and kind of have my own business. So I wanted to start a small business. And that was the genesis for TriNet. But as I looked around and looked at small business opportunities in HR, back then, we're talking late 80s, the only kind of businesses HR people were starting were consulting businesses. And I didn't know much about business models, but somehow figured out that working on the billable hour was really hard way to go to build a real company. And through being at the right time, having a creative collision, I happened to bump into the awareness that there was this small group of companies that were creating an HR service being sold to small businesses. And back then, this was revolutionary, okay? Because if you were somebody that had talents to offer, you weren't offering your talents to small businesses. You were talking, again, late 80s to early 90s, people worked for big corporations. That's where the best and brightest talent went. But I believed that that was going to change. So one of my things that maybe makes me a little bit different is that I spent a lot of time thinking about where's the world going? How can I skate out ahead of the puck? And I really believed that there would be growth in small business employment. I believe there would be avenues to take advantage of technology in having platforms to support a service that would include bundling together payroll, benefits, and HR all in one service, which again was revolutionary at the time. There was no such thing available. And that as growth and employment in small business grew, that they would need benefits to work in these small businesses. And that this was part of today is what's called the industry of professional employer organizations. So my beginning of TriNet was based on the conviction of these long-term trends, and that I wanted to have a small business that would take advantage of what I believe were compelling macroeconomics, and that somehow I'd figure it out. And that I didn't know anything about sales or marketing, which I paid dearly for that. And as a result, really plowed into this somewhat naively, but then had the near-death experience after 18 months of kind of working away at this and not being able to generate a meager amount of revenue. My wife was pregnant with our going into our second child, all right, and she wasn't working. I had no income. We had only 1.5 other people in the company besides Krista, my wife, and I. So meager amount of overhead, and yet we had borrowed every dollar, had tapped the retirement savings, had mortgaged the house. We were over levered, and we were about to go out of business. And that was in about mid 1990, so 18 months after we started. And yes, first near-death experience in the company.
And so talk to us about that. How did you break out of that death spiral?
I did something from an entrepreneurial standpoint, which is counterintuitive. Because if you think about the business of today, we call it PEO, professional employer organization. It's a business model that is based on economies of scale. And so you got to have a lot of small business customers to have enough scale to get good pricing on benefits and to rationalize your investment in a platform so that you can deliver value to the customers. And so you need every single piece of business that you can. We have an economies of scale business. All entrepreneurs want to get every customer they can. First 18 months of the business, that's all we did. And we failed, all right? So in an effort to try to find investors, I knew that I had to come up with a different strategy. And so what I did was I went back and did an analysis of our value proposition. And I thought hard about what is the right market that we can go after. And I was very simple-minded at that point, but I knew that if I concentrated all my efforts in a narrow vertical, that would give me the opportunity to leverage my meager sales and marketing budget, which was essentially me, because by the way, I was the only sales and marketing person for the first 6 years of the company. Think about that, all right? I was the only sales and marketing person for 6 years, all right? And we had no money for advertising, all right? And this was before, the web as we know it. So there were lots of headwinds. So how do you get over that? With the review of the value proposition and where that would map best in the marketplace, I concluded concentrating on emerging growth technology companies was the right place to point our limited resources. And that led me to a very different world than the traditional knocking on doors and talking to people at Chamber of Commerce meetings in the traditional small business community, all right? Because now I started going to these meetings and, let's say events where the only people there at these events that I sought out were people that were working in startups or were part of the startup community. They could have been lawyers and marketers and real estate people, but everyone was working specifically towards emerging growth technology and opportunities. And we're talking now, again, early 90s. And that is what changed everything. Not only because we started getting traction and kept true to that conviction of this is the right place to be a vertical market specialist, our value proposition allowed us to raise our prices, and we were charging more than our competitors. Competitors would try to sell in there without any success because we were so narrowly focused on our delivery side. We built up the expertise and the brand that was absolutely 100% targeted to just our vertical market. And our customers rewarded us for that, including our customers referring us to other potential customers. And that's how we could grow a company with one person running marketing and sales. And by the way, along those lines, at that 18-month point when we were about to go out of business and using this as our strategy, we did our first round of financing, raising a total of $50,000. And I can tell you that $50,000 is the difference between going out of business and my being here today to share that story. Very important.
Wow. So then you rode the wave, the dot-com wave in the mid to late 90s. So then you got through that death spiral. Then you grew fantastically fast. And then that also provides a lot of challenges too. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, there were a huge amount of challenges, like through that second half of the 90s. So first half of the 90s, we're growing like crazy. And by the time we get to 95, we're profitable, we're growing, and we saw a lot of opportunities to put capital to work. And by then we had brand. I could actually go on Sand Hill Road, which some people might recognize as ground zero for venture capital in the world, all right, in Menlo Park. And we could walk into the VC offices, and just getting an appointment then was very hard. And even today, unless you get referred in, it's pretty hard. But we could get in, and the VCs would say, Martin, we love TriNet. You guys are doing a great job and take care of our portfolio companies. But we can't invest in TriNet because you're a service business, and we invest in technology companies. So we have to pass. By the way, some of those investors now regret having passed, all right? But we could not raise money from private equity investors, even though we had a great business, we had proven economics, proven growth. There was a lot to like about it. So what do? We ended up getting a deal with a corporate investor, not from the US, but from the UK. And it was a public company, a public staffing company, then called Select, later called VDR. And it was the best thing ever, because what those guys in this UK company, including the chairman, who had 34 companies in his portfolio, flew across the pond all the way to the Bay Area to attend our board of directors meetings for 10 years. And what that company taught us was public market discipline, all right? We were a private company. This public company paid a high premium to get a controlling stake. So this was also another step in the entrepreneurial journey. We sold a controlling stake. And so I've been a minority shareholder of TriNet since 1995, okay? And we sold a controlling stake to this public company, and then started to learn how do you act like a public company while you're still a private company, a very important part of our journey. So now that's working well. With the money we raised from that round, we scaled from being a Bay Area company to a national company, opening up offices in other places where there were lots of technology companies, learning how to be like a public company. And we get to the end of the 90s, and we're riding high. So high, in fact, that if you were in the sales department at TriNet, you loved it because it was a great place to be. We had so much demand. Our salespeople were calling or had inbound calls. All they had to do was answer the phone, talk people through, get the deal done. It was incredible if you were in sales. If you were in any department in TriNet other than sales, you struggled, all right? Because the demand was overwhelming our capacity. So it was a very, very difficult thing. Lo and behold, we were navigating through all that, lots of management challenges, very strong team, very strong culture as part of that. And in 1999, we're getting ready to take the company public in early 2000. I moved my family from Silicon Valley to Little Falls that you see pictured here. And my wife and I wanted to raise our children in my hometown. My wife, Krista, is also from upstate New York. We wanted close family relationships. And we thought, all right, we're going to take TriNet public in early 2000. I'll commute for a year and a half or so, hand the reins off to somebody else, and life will be good. I mean, it sounded like a good plan. So we filed to go public on March 2nd, 2000. And if you know your .com history, that's the absolute high point of the market for anybody who remembers that, okay? And so at that point in time, having 99% of our revenue coming from .com customers was a great story, all right? What's not to like about that? We're selling pickaxes and shovels to the gold miners, all right? It's a great story from an investor standpoint. Long story on that one, but it didn't work out according to plan for a lot of reasons. You'll have to have me back on another one to explain all that because it's interesting. And we went out on the road show in October. The world was a completely different place in October of 2000. By then, all the air had escaped out of the bubble. And there's a saying, you never go out on an IPO roadshow unless you're 100% sure you're going to get the deal done. So we went all the way, got through the roadshow, very interesting, all right? It was fascinating. And we couldn't price the deal. We couldn't get the deal done in any way that would make sense. So we shut it down. So as a result, I'm one of the few people you'll ever meet that has been through the entire IPO process twice with the same company. Okay, so we retreat, and now post 2000, 2002, it's nuclear winter. As fast as we used to grow, we're now going downhill. All right, we're going downhill, and it's completely painful. You know, there was a lot of stories on that one too, but we were able to keep our best talent. All right, and even though we halved the overall size of the company, we went down because of the macroeconomics and because we had all this customer concentration and .com, which used to be great, and now it's .bomb, the complete opposite of where you want to be. All right, and lo and behold, we got through it, and we come out of that, and we started to grow and have built up and have never looked back. So, wow. Yes, it's been a ride. And a journey that continues today because I remain on TriNet's board, and it's both a lot of fun and something that is very meaningful to me.
And now it's a $5 billion company, right? Is that what you said earlier? I mean, it's
the market value of TriNet is about 5.3 billion or something.
So when they say an overnight success, this is a 25, 30-year overnight success, right? I mean, you've really done something special there. And to go on a roadshow twice is very, 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 very rare. So we could do a whole show on just that, just the sort of dynamics of roadshows, right? One that doesn't work out and one that does.
Yeah. No, credit to my successor, Burton Goldfield, roadshow number 2, he ran, and believe me, he did a much better job than I could. Right? This is good about having a successful team. All right.
Right. Absolutely. So tell us, there are a lot of companies that are suffering now that, similarly, cutting staff in this difficult time. What leadership lessons did you learn from that harrowing experience?
The importance of probably 2 things. First, throughout the company's history, we had a strong focus on hiring people with compatible core values. So we identified our 5 core values, and because of my HR background, I did a lot to build into the hiring process steps that would help all of our hiring managers know how to determine if someone had the core values that were important to be successful in the company. Because, if you have a lot of people who have common values, that reduces reasons for conflict that happens in most companies. All right, so that's issue number 1, is a long history of how to do that. And the second lesson that we had as part of our history and continues to this day is the importance of transparency. Because what happens at most companies, the people at the top know what's going on. Maybe they understand the financials, they understand important metrics, but there's not enough transparency across the whole dynamic of what it takes to have a company be successful. So we call that financial literacy. So we did an awful lot throughout our history in increasing the financial literacy of the entire company's workforce, all right? And so not only is that important to help manage growth, but even when you're going down, it's even more important, all right? Because we weren't keeping all the cards close to the vest, because of course, everyone can see our company's revenues are dropping, people are being laid off. It's a cause for major alarm. And yet we were very transparent, because the lesson is learned that if you're the employee and you're not being told what's really going on, you basically assume it's worse than it really is. Transparency helps more than hurts, even when times are bad. Those lessons came out of the way by the philosophy known as the great game of business, and people who are interested can find that at greatgame.com.
Great. And we'll talk about your book in a second, your new book, which I'm excited about. But tell us about Upstate New York. You really have some really good insights about building community in a place where there really wasn't a tech or startup community beforehand, right? So tell us about that story.
All right. So remember, for 10 years after I relocated the family in 1999, I'm commuting. It was supposed to be an 18-month to 24-month commute. I commuted for 10 years. So for 10 years, I'm going back and forth. And over that time, I spent a lot of time thinking about the Mohawk Valley that you see in this background versus the Silicon Valley where I'm operating TriNet. I'm TriNet CEO, all right? And I thought about these two valleys in broader upstate New York. And it frustrated me when I realized that upstate New York had all the right assets to be potentially a startup powerhouse, not as a single community, but as a region. Because if you think of upstate New York and realize that, for example, many people where we have a lot of colleges, more than 100. And collectively, those colleges enroll more than 500,000 college students. I mean, it's a big number. It's the largest concentration of STEM programs as a region of any place in the country, all right? We have more than $3.5 billion a year in corporate and academic research. Again, very big deal. We have a lot of capital, a very strong industrial capacity that was built over the prior 150 years. There was wealth that was created because of that industrial capacity. There are engineering resources and technical resources. We are within, Little Falls is within 200 miles of New York City, all right? I mean, so we have close proximity to the capital markets, personal and institutional ties to Wall Street. I mean, you put all that together, upstate New York should be somewhere maybe in the upper 25% of the places that get venture capital. So when I started this journey, what was really frustrating was in the 18 regions tracked for venture capital investment, upstate New York was ranked dead last, number 18 of 18. So I looked at that and said, you know, there was something wrong with that picture. Now I'm only one guy. What can I do about that? So that was all those airplane flights going back and forth. I spent a lot of time thinking about it. And when I stepped down from being a first TriNet CEO in 2008 and then chairman in 2010, that's when my commute really ended. And I put into play what I've been thinking about all those 10 years. So I had 10 years to think of a plan. And that began first with the creation of the nonprofit Upstate Venture Connect, which is at uvc.org. It's a nonprofit that is now in its 11th year, in which our vision with my partner, Nasser Ali, who's the CEO, my co-founder, and together, Nasser and I have really concentrated on how can we connect the resources across upstate New York's 7 metro areas and everything in between, so that instead of looking at startup community in a single community's light, recognize that there are ways we can build a stronger community by taking these assets and instead of operating like islands or silos, working together. That's our mission.
That's great. So talk to us about that, because as you know, nowadays there's a talk of people moving away from the Silicon Valley and now with work from home more apparent and during this pandemic, there are hubs, communities sprouting everywhere, not only across this state, this country, this region, but across the world. So tell us, what are some of the things that you've learned that are important to building a thriving ecosystem?
So this is the journey that I'm on, and I will say that we've made tremendous progress in upstate New York to achieve that goal of increasing the rate of startup creation and helping to support startup entrepreneurs. So the thesis that we've been focused on for 11 years and continues to this day, and what is outlined in my book, More Good Jobs, is how do we scale up the volume and quality of 2 things, all right? We want to scale up the volume and quality of creative collisions, which means how do we get the right people into the room, be it virtual, especially today, but before today, real live events, how do we get the right people into the room? And how can we scale up the volume and quality of referrals by trusted sources? So you might say, why those 2 things? Because when I think back to how fortunate I was in happening to be in Silicon Valley when I started my first company, and realizing after I moved my family back and really thought hard about upstate New York and how we had all these assets, and yet we were dead last, number 18 of 18 in the region's track for venture capital. And I really came to the conclusion, as I talk about in the book, if I had tried to start TriNet in upstate New York with what I knew back then, same guy, same idea, but just try to do it in upstate New York instead of Silicon Valley, I would have failed. The reason was the community. So what was it about that community? As I mentioned, when I would go to these events, and I'd be going now to Silicon Valley startup entrepreneur events and things aimed at emerging technology, what I found were people that didn't care that San Leandro, where my home was in the Bay Area, really wasn't considered part of Silicon Valley back then. I mean, today we use that term more broadly around the Bay Area. They didn't care that, I didn't go to the right schools, or they didn't care that I didn't have a technology background. I had no technology background. I had no technology relationships. None of that really mattered, all right? What mattered was, are you doing something that's interesting, all right? What mattered was, to what extent is what you're working on not only of interest to me, but how are you helping other people? Because what people don't understand about what makes Silicon Valley work, it's not about the venture capital. It's about the entrepreneurs, especially the seasoned entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, give back without an expectation of return. It's a pay it forward culture. So when we think about the journey we've been on in Upstate Venture Connect and described in the book, it's about how can we create the culture as well that helps people realize that we want to do what we can to promote the idea of give first without having to expect that I want to get something back. So when I'm running around in these events trying to build TriNet, I run into an experienced entrepreneur. I'd say, this is what TriNet does. And that experienced entrepreneur might say something like, oh, Martin, that's interesting. I don't have a need for outsourced HR services, but Bob over here, on the other hand, he's hiring a whole bunch of people. He's got a lot of headaches. Let me introduce you to him. And so the guy that's doing the introduction just met me 5 minutes ago. All right. There was no basis for saying he trusts me. All right. There's no basis for that. And yet he's going out of his way to introduce me to his friend. All right. Referral by trusted source. And so today we've made a lot of progress in upstate New York in helping to change that dynamic and get more people to embrace it. And that is the story of more good jobs. But that problem of people saying, I'm only going to help you if I think you have something in it for me, that particular transactional viewpoint is alive and well. I mean, you can go to Chamber of Commerce meetings and you can find that pretty easily. And it's, by the way, one of the reasons that startup entrepreneurs, they don't like going to those events. They're not going to these events to be sold to, all right? And so the whole notion of giving, as opposed to how can I go and extract, changing a community's culture to do that is actually pretty hard. And this is the journey that we're on.
Right. And in the book, you mentioned, about this trusted network, helping other entrepreneurs. Are there ways to scale that up?
Yeah, we give some examples. So, for example, in chapter 6 of the book, we talk about highly influential people. Who are the people that you want to go out and court to help you grow your cause? And by the way, these principles apply for whatever your cause is, okay? But in my example of growing startup community, we identified, here is the profile of the people that we want to bring into the tribe. And do they have the values? Just like I talked about the values that was important for our growing TriNet. We developed our value set and said, and I talk about that in chapter 6. And then we went out and we found people that were in that group. And we looked importantly for people that are doers, instead of just saying, like in the first couple of years of Upstate Venture Connect, I could talk to college presidents. I could get into the mayors and the top economic development people and even corporate execs. But, I learned that just going from the top down doesn't work. What works better is finding the people that are actually doing things and have compatible values and grow from the bottom up, okay? So we go out there and then to scale up the tribe, It's a matter of doing things that help give a reason for that tribe to come together. One of those clearly has to do with capital. So in chapter 7 of the book, we talk about avenues for private capital. And the best approach is not to have a network where people show up at a dinner event and have the chance to listen to people giving startup pitches. That doesn't really work too well. But if you take those same people and put them into a seed capital fund where everyone has skin in the game, totally different dynamic. We go into detail on that in chapter 7. Another type of curated network that we put together, you'll see on the UVC website, called UNY50. And UNY50 is a by invitation group that essentially are people that are highly influential persons that I described in chapter 6. We're displaying the right values, who come together and we form a unique group so that these people can help each other in what they're doing. And we're also sharing the stories of how we are helping the next generation of entrepreneurs. So those are two methods of scaling up referral by trusted source through really curated networks.
That's great. And can you hold that book up, Martin? There we go. All right.
All right.
On Amazon.
And if I share the screen for a second, then you'll see at the website moregoodjobs.org, if that comes through, you can see not only the access to introduction of the book, but you can also go on to our community site. You can register on the community site where you have a chance to become part of the More Good Jobs community.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Before we go to questions, and I want to ask the audience for questions, let's share with us just one thing, Martin, that entrepreneurs can take away from this conversation.
For the entrepreneurs, as well as anybody that is trying to pursue a cause and trying to build a tribe to support your cause, because that's kind of what I'm about, all right? So like I get wrapped up in causes, and this one is an important one, helping communities create jobs. I believe helps create stronger families and stronger communities and has a lot of impact on lives, okay? So that's a cause for me. And whether you're pursuing a cause or you're trying to build a company, and for many entrepreneurs, the company they build is also pursuing a cause. And the key attribute that I would share, and I hope has come across in my remarks, is the importance of giving first, all right? Because, like I'm not the smartest guy in the world, all right, but I've learned, in part because I've also had the good fortune to have seen this with some other very, very successful people. And again, something I talk about in the book, that those people that are giving without expectation of return usually end up finding ways that are successful because the people that they're helping end up wanting to help them, all right? Not because they had a particular transaction in mind, but when you can learn to do that scalably, all right? Like even in selling TriNet, selling TriNet services, I spent a lot of effort trying to help the people that I was selling to, and so that they could see that my primary motivation was that I was trying to help them, even if it meant that they weren't buying TriNet. Your typical salesperson says, as soon as they get the signal, this prospect is not going to buy, therefore they're going to go into the dustbin, all right? Prospects are very sensitive to that, all right? And good salespeople are going to be right there helping that prospect, giving more than they ask for in return, all right? And the same thing goes for anyone that's trying to build a tribe. That's how we've been able to build a substantial tribe. Upstate Venture Connect, we've got about 16,000 people that are now connected to us in one way or another. And at its core, the key value that we put across is trying to get more and more people in that tribe that are saying, hey, I'm a successful entrepreneur. I want to be helping the next generation. And I'm going to be doing it not because, it's all about how I'm going to help my business or, I'm going to increase my public profile to do this or that. It's like, I want to give without expectation of return. And I know that good things will come back.
That's great. Thank you for that. It's always, giving first makes so much sense for the community, and it comes back. It does come back. I know I've been in this business for a long time, so I know giving certainly comes back in spades, and makes for a more robust community. So one of the first questions, Martin, is about raising capital. Any advice in this day and age, how best to find investors for your startup?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there because it depends on what stage the company is at. All right. You might say, if you're at a stage where you're already generating revenue and can show growth that is predictable, and that's really the challenge. Your ability to be predictable is the number one thing that matters as you go up the capital stack. The higher up the capital stack you go, the more you are being paid and rewarded based on how predictable you are. And it's, of course, especially brutal in the public market, as we said earlier, okay? It's run your private company like a public company and you will do well. So let's presume you're not at that stage where you've built predictability into your sales model so that you invest a certain number of dollars in sales and marketing. This is what the output's going to be. And that's where all entrepreneurs want to be, is invest the time to become predictable. But let's say you're not there yet. You're still earlier stage. The way you're going to raise capital has everything to do with building your network, because your capital sources are more likely going to come to you by a referral from a trusted source. And so how do you get referrals by trusted source? You have to be looking outward. And yes, you could spend a lot of time on the keyboard, and especially during COVID right now, you have to some extent, all right? And can you, by virtue of being conscious of how are you growing your network, including through virtual means, such as attending conferences that permit attendees to interact with each other? Are you taking advantage of those things? Are you meeting new people and having the opportunity to have people introduce you to others? There are tremendous ways to go and approach that. One of my favorite resources along those lines is a book called Meet 100 People, which you'd find meet100people.com. And it's a great book written not for the COVID environment, but speaking specifically on very practical strategies on how you extend your network. And so by targeting who are the right investors and getting some input from people who are experienced investors in your category, develop your target list and pursue it. And narrower is better than trying to boil the ocean.
Great advice. What about the backlash against Silicon Valley companies like Facebook and Google and Uber? And do you think that Silicon Valley culture still has that pay it forward mantra, or has that changed?
There's no question that there's been a certain amount of dilution, but yes, it is still there. Because let me give you another thing that is very much alive today, all right? If you exit your company in Silicon Valley, as most people do, I mean, there are brands that people are familiar with, and the ones that are always in the news, they're in the stratosphere, but for every Mark Zuckerberg, there's like 10,000 others that you never heard of, okay? And so most of the people that are exiting these companies, and it could be for, $1 million, 10 million, 50 million, 100 million, all right? Most of these people, as they exit companies, what do? All right. Now, there are some people that just started other companies, serial entrepreneurs, not uncommon. But suppose you're at that level where it's not about having to start another company. All right. Those people in Silicon Valley are out there spending their time helping the next generation, even today. And I can tell you, because I'm still a Silicon Valley guy, I still have a home there, and I still spend a lot of time there. And you are not cool. If you're an exited entrepreneur and you're not helping the next generation, you're not cool. It's just that simple. So yes, that ethos still exists, but at the same time, so many people have plowed in there, and the influence of some of the largest companies has a lot of people that are just trying to say, I'm going to start a company to be a billionaire. And that's, that's noise. It's noise. But the ethos of pay it forward is still strong. And Silicon Valley is not the only place that now has the corner of that market. As we talk about in the book, my favorite example is Boulder, Colorado. All right, my friend Brad Feld, who I knew before he moved to Boulder. And he moved to Boulder in 1995. And you can imagine at that point, 1995, TriNet were ramping. We're selling only to emerging growth technology companies. 1995, Boulder is not anything special in emerging tech. I opened a TriNet office in Boulder just because Brad Feld moved there. And lo and behold, 6, 7 years later, the place is ranked number 2 on the planet for venture capital per capita. All right. And, this was a guy who really knows how to build startup community. And it's completely transformed the city of Boulder in the process.
That's a great example too. Boulder has really picked up the pace, and clearly Brad has helped that, and obviously TriNet too. Now, a follow-on question to that was about, now with everyone working from home, right? Greater geographic dispersion of tech talent and startup talent. How does that affect the foundation for communities, especially when collisions, as you mentioned, may be more difficult, particularly in person?
Yeah, I can speak to some things because it's been a big challenge. I have 4 nonprofits, and Upstate Venture Connect is the most established and one that I spend the most time on. And it's been hard because it's events oriented. We're trying to scale up creative collisions. And not that UVC is an events organization, but we help others get their events publicized, and we help drive traffic to startup community events. So the lessons there are how one does a virtual event matters, all right? And even when we did our virtual conference, so Upstate Venture Connect only does one event a year of our own, our annual conference. And we put a lot of thought into doing the 2020 annual conference on that idea of how can we get the attendees coming to our virtual conference to interact with each other. So we ended up using a platform called Brella. We did a lot of stuff around it to build interaction in a virtual way, and it actually worked out great. Not only did people love it, but we had the analytics. The beauty about done properly, you can actually see what's happening, and we had the analytics to see those interactions, and it was tremendously rewarding. So how one does a virtual conference matters, and if you're an attendee, you should be looking at those conferences that permit those interactions. Plan for it, because you can't be there in person, so use some of your time to plan for it. Look at who's going to be there, decide who you're going to try to get to, look for ways to DM them, LinkedIn, send a message, look for ways to orchestrate a contact, because you're going to an event with someone that has a similar reason for being there, and it's on the basis of common affinity. It makes it easier for you to stumble into someone and have a creative collision. That's lesson number 1. And the second thing that I'll mention along these lines that we've seen work really well, we work as one of our initiatives in Upstate Venture Connect. We've gotten behind a group called Innovation Collective, which you can find at innovationcollective.co. And in Utica is where we're doing a beta with them to create the Utica Rome community, which is in the Mohawk Valley, to be a place that can build startup community from the ground up using what I believe is a very successful formula. And that's also a very interesting story, but one that there's a lot of promise around it. And I say that this is an example of how this organization, even with all the restrictions of COVID and having a total events-based model, has still been able to grow the amount of interactions and the engagement of people in virtual ways. So for the leaders that want to make a difference, there are ways it can be done. Look for best practices and embrace them is the conclusion.
I agree with that 100%, Martin. Clearly, in some way, entrepreneurs can be more effective, or aspiring entrepreneurs can be more effective in networking rather than being there in person if they take the time, and because it's a equalized leveling playing field, right? So if they're really thoughtful about it and make the outreach, it could be very effective for them. One last question about communities. What about the interaction of other support organizations like chambers of commerce or local SBDCs, or local support organizations similar to that, and the universities? How does that all combine in your framework?
So all those organizations can be contributing towards building a good startup community and can help the local economy. But generally, they don't achieve their potential. And when I thought long and hard about it and looked at the experiences that we have across upstate New York, because our governor is always talking about the billions of dollars, tax dollars, that we plow into this stuff, okay? As if the metric of success is how much money we spend, when in fact, the metric of success should be how many jobs are we creating, okay? And when we look at kind of what gets in the way for them underachieving, including even, privately funded nonprofits that have similar goals, like a Chamber of Commerce. My observation is that too oftentimes, those that are dependent on those types of sources of funding think too narrowly about their constituency. And so they have a focus of, hey, if I'm a college, all my activities and events are for my students, alums, and faculty, as an example, all right? And they could be in a community where there are other people in that local community that could also benefit. They never know about what's going on in that community, all right? And the same thing goes across all those other organizations. They get narrowly focused on, here is my mission. I'm receiving dollars from this government grant or that government grant. And so the only thing that I'm going to do is in line with that grant, and not realizing they're going to make better progress if they actually collaborate with other organizations that might overlap and have some people involved that they're trying to help. So that's why at Upstate Venture Connect, and what we talk about in the book, More Good Jobs, is the importance of building collaboration across geographic boundaries, and importantly, across institutional boundaries. It's counterintuitive thinking, and it's one of the reasons why, I used to talk to college presidents and try to get them on board with this, and I basically stopped doing that because it doesn't work. Because there'd be so much distance between the people at the top who I might convince, and they'd say, great idea, of course we should collaborate. But the people down at the bottom who are doing the work never got the message, all right? And instead we concentrate on who are the doers, because it's the people that are the doers that make things happen.
I agree 100%, Martin. But tell me just let me follow up on that one question about governments, right? Sometimes there's all these nice press releases about all this money going into a particular region, whether it's upstate New York and the nanotech and all the billions gone there, or localities that are towns that are supporting their ecosystem with programs or money. Does that work? And where has it worked well? Or does it not work?
Jim, I don't know. The whole thing, if we start getting into the political side, you'll have to have me come back because one of my nonprofits does happen to be this thing called the Upstate Jobs Party, all right, which you can find at upstatejobs.org. And that's a journey that I've been on since 2016, after, as you're aware, running as an independent candidate on the Upstate Jobs Party line. Independent candidate for Congress, New York's 22nd congressional district. Thankfully, I was not elected, but I learned a lot, and that continues to power this journey. And there's a lot that government can do. It's something we continue to work very hard at, and we're making a lot of progress in getting those politicians and people who are in the legislature, and also executive positions like mayors and county executives, starting to understand what are the right ways for government to be involved. I think it's chapter 10 in the book. We have a whole chapter dedicated to government that talks about not only policies, because that matters, obviously tax incentives matters if you want to fuel more private investment, but even in New York State's case, as we talk about in the book, we have a great incentive and nobody knows about it. It's a failure on the part of the government to have an incentive that private investors never heard of, okay? And they do a terrible job of administering it, all right? So there's a lot that government can do, but you have to be smart about it. And remember that in general, when it comes to elections, and what it's expensive to do elections, to run for office, and they think in 2-year cycles. When you build a startup community, it's not a 2-year kind of deal, all right? It's just not. It's like we've been at this 11 years. We made a lot of progress, but we got a long ways to go. It really requires that long-term commitment. And to find political leaders that can embrace that philosophy, that's part of my charter in the Upstate Jobs Party, and we're making progress.
I hear you loud and clear, Martin. So why don't we're closing out here. Talk to us, tell us, share with us a poem or saying that you'd like the audience to hear.
Oh man, okay. When it comes to poems entrepreneurs like, many people have heard this thing from Theodore Roosevelt about the man in the arena. It's a popular poem and one that I like too. It means a lot to be out there in the ring and ready to be bloodied. But the one that means more to me than that and is specific and maybe has some not only Bay Area roots, but one that is very specific to my point, begins with this statue here in Oakland, California. If you walk down Broadway, which is the main drag in downtown Oakland, and you get to the foot of Broadway, you'll see this statue. Now, those of you that are familiar with East Bay might recognize that statue and know that that place is called Jack London Square, all right? And that statue of Jack London, who we know is an author and gold miner, I mean, it's just a really fascinating guy. It goes back to the ethos of even the gold rush era, which those of you that have probably heard of the San Francisco 49ers, so you can recognize you're talking 1849 is when that gold rush began. That ethos of going after something really big, going after pursuing dreams, and without regard to what your background was or who you knew, that began certainly in the gold rush era, picked up a lot of steam, and pioneers helped each other be successful. And this was all part of Jack London's story. And if you look at that statue, at the very bottom, there is this plaque, all right? And the plaque has his few lines here in a very short poem that I'll read called "I'd Rather Be Ashes Than Dust," all right? So I'd rather be ashes than dust. I would rather that my spark should burn out in a brilliant blaze than it be stifled by dry rot. I would rather be a superb meteor, every atom of me in magnificent glow, instead of a sleepy and permanent planet. The proper function of man is to live, not to exist. I shall not waste my days trying to prolong them. I shall use my time. Now, that's an ethos that all of us as entrepreneurs can embrace, and all of us that are trying to make a difference in the world and build a tribe to help support whatever it is that we're working on.
That is a wonderful way to end. Martin, thank you so much for coming on today. Thank you for your leadership. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please like it, leave a review, and subscribe. See you soon.